Well, good afternoon. I'm Daniel Benjamin, the director of the Dickey Center. I'm delighted to welcome you here to this event on U.S.-Pakistani relations and the future of South Asia. I'm really thrilled that today we are hosting Bruce Riedel, one of the most distinguished veterans of Middle East, Persian Gulf, and South Asian policymaking in Washington in the last generation. In the course of a 30-year career at the Central Intelligence Agency, Bruce served as a senior advisor, usually at the National Security Council, to the last 4 U.S. presidents on that very broad and deeply interconnected region. It would be difficult to overstate just how central Bruce has been in Washington. And when I was thinking of introducing him, I was reminded of a line from the great David Mamet movie from the late 1980s called House of Games, in which the character is described as the guy behind the guy behind the guy. And I mean that in two senses. First is that as a long-serving National Security Council senior director, he was really the person to whom key decision makers were always turning for insights and thoughts, and yet he was always out of sight. So he was the guy behind the guy in that regard. But he was also the guy behind the guy in the sense that in innumerable pictures in newspapers every day on presidential trips, he is the person lugging a large briefcase full of papers behind the president and the national security advisor. So in both senses, he played that role. Today, Bruce is a senior fellow and a director of the Brookings Intelligence Project, part of Brookings' new Center for 21st Century Security and Intelligence. And he also serves as a senior fellow in the Saban Center for Middle East Policy. It's quite difficult to list all the jobs Bruce has had and all the key issues he's been at the heart of. As a member of President Bill Clinton's Middle East negotiating team, Bruce took part in the Camp David peace negotiations, as well as innumerable other Arab-Israeli summits. As advisor to President Clinton on South Asia, Bruce organized the president's landmark trip to India in 2000. Among other things you won't find on his webpage at Brookings, he helped to begin the secret discussions that ended Libya's involvement in terrorism. And he helped structure President Clinton's intervention with Pakistan in the wake of the Kargil incursion, thus avoiding, or preventing, I should say, a nuclear exchange between Pakistan and India. And how many people can say that? It's noteworthy that Bruce doesn't, but as someone who worked alongside him, I know this to be a fact. In January 2009, at the request of President Obama, Bruce chaired a review of American policy towards Afghanistan and Pakistan, one that was badly needed. He's also consulted with the British government, and at the request of Prime Minister Cameron, briefed the British National Security Council. Bruce retired from the CIA, but he has shown that there is great productivity in retirement. He is the author of several books, including The Search for Al-Qaeda, Its Leadership, Ideology, and Future, The Deadly Embrace, Pakistan, America, and the Future of the Global Jihad. So you might get some sense of his background on that issue. Last year, he published Avoiding Armageddon, America, India, and Pakistan to the Brink and Back. He has a new book coming out next month entitled What We Won, America's Secret War in Afghanistan, 1979 to 1989. Bruce, in addition to his duties at Brookings, teaches at the Johns Hopkins University School for Advanced International Studies at SAIS. He's a graduate of Brown and holds a master's from Harvard, and he's a recipient of the Intelligence Medal of Merit and the Distinguished Intelligence Career Medal. And I should close by just saying that he also has a reputation in Washington for being possibly the scariest briefer you will ever meet. So I don't want to taint in any way this presentation, but if you are queasy, you might think about all that. So I'm going to turn it over to Bruce now. Welcome.
Thank you, Dan, for that very nice introduction. Dan and I have been working together, I think, for 2 decades, inside and outside of government. And I have to compliment Dartmouth. You really have picked one of the finest people you could to run this center. And after a little more than 24 hours of seeing this center, I can see it was also a perfect fit for Dan. As Dan said, I'm going to talk about the United States' relationship with Pakistan. I think that it's safe to say that the United States' relationship with Pakistan is one of the most dysfunctional bilateral relations the United States has with any country in the world. I won't say it's the most dysfunctional. I'm sure there's someone here who can tell me that there's something even more full of contradictions than the United States' relationship with Pakistan, but it's clearly up there in the top 3. Pakistan is a very, very important country. It is the 6th largest in the world. There are 190 million Pakistanis today. If their fertility rate does not change, by 2050, there will be 460 million Pakistanis. It will be the 5th largest country in the world. Even with a very, very modest reduction in its fertility rate, there's likely to be 335 million Pakistanis by 2050. Many people tend to ignore Pakistan because it becomes the 2 eyes, India and Iran. Iran, of course, is a country that we all have come to love to hate over the last 30 years and like to focus on it. And India is a sparkling, shining, huge country. We kind of miss Pakistan in the middle. But if you took Pakistan out of between the 2 eyes and compared it to South Africa, Turkey, Indonesia, it would be in that category. I said our relationship is dysfunctional. I'll give you just one example to underscore the dysfunctional nature of it. 3 years ago, in the early part of 2011, the Central Intelligence Agency came to President Barack Obama and said, we found him, or we think we found him. We're 50% confident we have found Osama bin Laden, high-value target number 1, hiding in a safe house in Abbottabad, Pakistan. We're pretty sure, and we increasingly will be certain of that as we continue to collect over the next few months. Abbottabad was not your normal Pakistani city. First of all, it's named after John Abbott, who is not a Pakistani. He's a British Army officer who's created the city in the 1850s. It is home of the Kabul Military Academy, the equivalent of West Point. It is, in short, a military city, a garrison city, a city of unusual security. The president, upon being told this, decided that we would not tell the government of Pakistan that the most wanted person in human history was just an hour away from Islamabad, just an hour away from Pakistan's general military headquarters in Rawalpindi. Now, in retrospect, I doubt that there's anyone in this room who doubts that was a smart thing to do. I don't think anyone thinks we should have told the government of Pakistan, right? Of course not. But it was an extraordinary decision. By May 2011, 2 presidents, George W. Bush and Barack Obama, had given Pakistan $25 billion, that's with a B, billion dollars, in economic and military assistance since 9/11. The $25 billion purchased for Pakistan, or provided Pakistan, with 18 F-16 jet fighters, 8 P-3 Orion maritime patrol aircraft, 6,000 TOW anti-tank missiles, 500 AMRAAM air-to-air missiles, 6 C-130 transport aircraft, 20 Cobra attack helicopters, 1 Perry-class missile frigate, and a partridge in a pear tree. No partridge in a pear tree. No country in the world got as much military and economic assistance from the United States in that time period, aside from Pakistan, except Israel. And when you are getting as much aid as Israel, you are eating at the top lunch plate of American foreign policy. The reason we had given Pakistan all this aid, and by the way, we continue to do it, we're continuing to provide them billions of dollars in aid every year, was simple: to fight Al-Qaeda. That was the purpose. $25 billion to fight Al-Qaeda, and when the moment of truth comes and we have found high-value target number one, nobody thinks we should tell the government of Pakistan. If that's not a dysfunctional relationship, I don't know what is. And to continue funding their money after it underscores the contradictions in this relationship. The Pakistanis, for their part, after the military operation that brought the end of Osama bin Laden, set up an investigation to investigate how the United States found bin Laden. Not how bin Laden was in Pakistan, but how we found bin Laden. Now that is a very distorted relationship. Pakistan today, I think, can best be understood in a half an hour or 35 minutes by looking at three critical factors. And I want to spend a little bit of time on all three of them. The first critical factor is the legacy of a half century of military dictatorship. Pakistan had its first military coup in 1958, and it got rid of its last military dictator in 2008. During the course of those 50 years, there were brief interregnums of civilian government, but by and large, it was a military dictatorship for the entire period. Today, Pakistan is a democratic government. The first democratic government after the military dictatorships, led by President Zardari, was the first Pakistani government in the history of the country to actually fill out an entire term in office. No elected Pakistani government had ever filled out an entire term in office. On top of that, it was replaced in a democratic transition. It lost its re-election bid, and a new democratic elected government has come into place. Pakistan, in short, in the 6 years since its last military dictator was removed, has made some substantial progress towards moving towards a more normal, democratic, civilian-ruled country. It has a very strong judiciary today. It has a vibrant press. I won't say it's a free press. It's certainly not a responsible press, but it's a vibrant press. You can read almost anything you want in the Pakistani press. But the legacy of those 50 years remains. Pakistan has a state within a state. The Army and its intelligence service, the Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate, better known as the ISI, is a state within a state, wholly unaccountable to the civilian government. The ISI routinely murders journalists who cross its line. Everyone knows they do it, and they're never held accountable for it. The Pakistani state within a state runs a network of terrorist organizations across the subcontinent, carries out all kinds of covert operations, and runs the critical portfolios of Pakistan's foreign policy. Afghanistan, for example. The Pakistani army controls the Afghan portfolio. Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif occasionally gives nice speeches in which he talks about Afghanistan and Pakistan being brothers and needing to work together. He has no control over what the Pakistani government actually does in Afghanistan. The United States, of course, over the course of those 50 years, almost always tilted towards the military dictator. We fell in love with every single one of them. And it was a bipartisan thing. Democrats and Republicans all endorsed the military dictatorships. If you look at the history of American aid to Pakistan, almost 75% of the aid was given to the military dictators, less than 25% was given to the civilians. If Pakistanis don't believe we support democracy in their country, they have good historical reason to believe so. This state within a state carries out, in essence, its own foreign policy. And the civilians have some influence, but not on anything that really matters to the state within a state. The dilemma for the United States is, how do we help the civilians, given our track record? We'd like to see the civilian democratic government do better, but frankly, we're borne down with a history to the contrary. The second factor, the army and the intelligence community, remains as obsessed today as it has been in its entire history with the traditional Pakistani enemy, India. Pakistani generals do not sit around looking forward to the day they can fight the Pakistani Taliban in the Swat Valley. You don't become a hero. You don't get the Pakistani equivalent of the Medal of Honor for killing your own people. If you want to be famous as a Pakistani general, you want to have fought against the Indians. The problem, of course, is the Pakistani military has fought the Indians 4 times and lost all 4 times. In fact, the 3rd time, disastrously. Half the country was lost and became Bangladesh. To balance that, the Pakistani army has promoted 2 policies. One, patronship for terrorism, I'll come to that in a second. And second, creation of a nuclear weapons capability. And they have outdone themselves. Pakistan today has the fastest growing nuclear arsenal in the world. Pakistan has more nuclear weapons than England and France. It is the 4th largest nuclear weapons state in the world. And there is no evidence that it has reached its climax. In fact, Pakistan today is increasingly developing tactical nuclear weapons in order to use nuclear weapons on a tactical battlefield with the Indians. Now, you don't have to have a PhD in atomic science to realize that if you start developing tactical nuclear weapons, the problem of command and control and security goes up significantly in that environment. This whole project, the nuclear weapons project, is not controlled by the civilian government. President Zardari, in one interview, in fact, admitted, I don't even know what's going on. Back in 1991, when then Deputy National Security Advisor Bob Gates went to Pakistan during one of those brief periods when it had civilian rule, and Benazir Bhutto was in charge, he went to her and told her about the Pakistani nuclear program, and she said, oh my God, I had no idea. Nobody ever told me this. Can I tell the army this? Literally. What are we going to do about that? A country with the fastest growing nuclear arsenal in the world? Well, we decided to shoehorn the Indian nuclear program into the NPT through the Bush administration's US-India civil nuclear deal, but nobody seriously considers Pakistan an opportunity for a similar Pakistan-US nuclear deal, civilian nuclear deal. The Pakistani nuclear program today is the big hole in the president's whole policy of trying to bring the world to 0 nuclear weapons. The fastest growing nuclear arsenal in the world is under no international constraints whatsoever. The third factor, after the state within a state and the obsession with India, is that Pakistan carries the very unique attribute of being both a patron state sponsor of terrorism, I would argue probably the leading patron state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and a victim of terror at the same time. Pakistan supports groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, the group that attacked Mumbai in November 2008. It doesn't support groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba. As Dan knows better than almost anyone, it runs Lashkar-e-Taiba. Or to put it more accurately, the Army, the ISA, and Lashkar-e-Taiba are one entity that is entwined deeply. We know that from the Mumbai attack. We have the confession of the Pakistani-American David Headley, who was involved in all of the planning of the attack. And he tells us in detail how the ISI, Lashkar-e-Taiba were working together. But that's not the only group. Jaish Mohammed, Hezbollah Mujahideen, the Afghan Taliban, the Haqqani Network, these are all instruments of the Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate. They control their safe havens. They control their media outlets. They provide them with assistance in funding and assistance in getting weapons. For example, the head of Lashkar-e-Taiba, a man who has a $10 million bounty on his head, isn't hiding in Pakistan. He's on Pakistani television once a week. He routinely comes on Pakistani television and says, hey, CIA, you looking for me? Channel 45, here I am. And tomorrow I'll be live on channel whatever. And yet, at the same time, somewhere around 50,000 Pakistanis have died in militant-related violence in Pakistan since 2001. That's the Pakistani code word for terrorism. Car bombs which were an anomaly in Pakistan before 2001, have become a weekly occurrence. Large portions of the country are in the hands of anti-government militant groups which began under the control of the ISI, but which have migrated out of its control and have become enemies of the ISI today. Pakistan's largest city, Karachi, its biggest port, is today about 40% in the hands of the Pakistan Taliban. That means that anyone who the Pakistani Taliban doesn't want to allow in a neighborhood enters that neighborhood at peril of death. Now, as Americans, we can take some consolation in all of this. We shouldn't take very much. The consolation we can take is that every American president since George Bush Sr. has been telling Pakistan that if you patronize terror, if you welcome the snakes into your garden, sooner or later you will be consumed by it. We were right. So much for being right. All of these factors together impact and help to create the dysfunctional relationship that the United States and Pakistan have today. Here's another example of the contradiction. For the last decade, we've been fighting the longest war in American history in Afghanistan. Our enemy is the Afghan Taliban. The Afghan Taliban's headquarters is in Pakistan. It's in Quetta. Everybody knows that. The head of the Afghan Taliban, Mullah Omar, lives in Quetta, except when he goes to Karachi. He operates out of ISI safe houses. The ISI provides him with his security. In other words, our enemy in Afghanistan for a decade has not just been the Afghan Taliban. In fact, in many ways, they're not manipulating the strings at all. The Pakistani government. And yet, remember what I said at the beginning? We have given Pakistan $25 billion to assist us in the war against terrorism and in the war in Afghanistan. It's a contradiction that American presidents and secretaries of state and secretary of defense have understood, and yet have found no better solution to dealing with. Another one. For the last 6 years, not only have we been fighting a proxy war with Pakistan and Afghanistan, we've been engaged in a drone war in Pakistan. It began in partnership with Pakistan's last military dictator. After he fell, Pakistan decided it didn't really want to have a drone war in its territory anymore, and 5 years ago asked us to stop. And 5 years ago, we ramped up drone operations to the highest rate they've ever been. Now, those drone operations have actually been fairly successful in achieving the goal we set out to achieve, degrade the al-Qaeda capability and infrastructure in Pakistan. But they've also had obvious counterproductive effects in terms of how Pakistanis view the United States of America. Where does all of this leave us? Where is Pakistan going? And what does that mean for the United States' relationship with Pakistan? And what does it mean for the larger picture of the future of South Asia? Well, at this point, first thing I'm going to claim is humility. Trying to predict the future of Pakistan is a humbling experience. Very, very, very few experts believed that President Zardari would actually serve out his whole term in office. And I have good reason to believe President Zardari never thought he would actually turn out his whole term in office. But he did. And much of that was pure luck and the mistakes of his enemies, including in the Pakistani military. The US-Pakistani relationship, as I've already indicated to you, is also a very volatile relationship. Many people have compared it to a bad marriage. I don't know anyone's marriage, not even on the soaps, not Dallas, nowhere that has a marriage like the United States and Pakistan. I don't know anyone who has married the same person 4 times and divorced them 4 times. This is an unusual relationship, and it's incredibly volatile. It can turn on a dime. In 1990, President Bush determined that Pakistan was building nuclear weapons. Not exactly a huge surprise to anyone. And the relationship, which had just won the Cold War, cratered overnight. In 1979, a Pakistani mob, probably sent by the ISI, torched the American embassy in Islamabad and almost killed every American in the embassy. And 2 months later, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and we were over that. We accepted their $25 million to build a new embassy. And of course, on September 11th, 2001, a relationship which was so full of sanctions, it was anticipated that the law schools of the Ivy League could produce lawyers for generations to try to fix the problem, was all resolved in an afternoon. Pakistan decided, we're with you. Or at least that's what they told us. And the whole relationship changed in the course of a moment. So, humility, this is a very volatile subject. But let me go back to my 3 factors and look at each one in turn, looking at the future. First, the state within a state. The state within a state is about to have its most profound challenge in the history of Pakistan. Pakistan's last military dictator, General Musharraf, is now in court, charged with treason, 5 counts of treason. The penalty for treason in Pakistan is capital punishment. If he's found guilty, he almost certainly will be executed. That means for the first time, the state within a state, what Pakistanis refer to as the deep state, may actually be held accountable by a court of law. Prime Minister Sharif is walking on eggshells as he deals with this issue, particularly because the man who threw him into exile in 1999 was Musharraf. There's no love lost here. 10 years living in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, does not inure you to wanting to support the man who sent you there. On the other hand, he knows that if Musharraf is found guilty and executed, all of the generals, whether they like Musharraf or not, are going to say, hey, these aren't the rules. We're unaccountable. We're generals. We don't be held accountable. And in addition, Musharraf didn't run a military dictatorship all by himself for 10 years. Who else might be held accountable? Remember, I also said Pakistan has an increasingly independent judiciary. Sharif doesn't control the outcome of the trial. He cannot guarantee the outcome he wants. A deal is, of course, possible. And behind the scenes, the Saudis are very actively involved in trying to make a deal. But the point is, the state within a state, the civilian government, the future of democracy, the future of civilian government, civil-military relations in Pakistan is now hanging in the balance. The second factor, India. Up until now, Pakistanis have been obsessed with India. I believe at the end of this week, when Narendra Modi wins the Indian election and is clearly going to be the next prime minister of India, Pakistanis are really going to be obsessed with India, because they're going to wake up and discover that they don't have Manmohan Singh and Sonia Gandhi, people who they've come to understand, running India. They have a new right-wing, hard Hindu nationalist government. Very unpredictable new Indian government. Knowing Pakistanis as I do, it will take the election results actually becoming official for this to all set in. When it does, there will be panic. What do we do? Things will calm down after a while. I don't think Modi's going to invade Pakistan the day he becomes prime minister. I don't think he's going to invade Pakistan at all. The last thing Modi wants is more Muslims in India. That's kind of the whole point of who Modi is. But Indian-Pakistani relations, which have become relatively comfortable in a certain bend over the last decade, are about to change in very profound and important and unpredictable ways. Thirdly, the whole issue of terrorism. It's probably been missed by most of you, but the drone war is over. There hasn't been a lethal drone mission in Pakistan in 4 months. That doesn't mean there haven't been drone missions. I'm sure there are lots of drone missions. But there hasn't been a lethal one in 4 months. I'm not saying it's over completely, but I think it's safe to say that the CIA has essentially bugged out. It's gone. It's leaving Afghanistan. Of course it is. America is leaving Afghanistan. It should leave Afghanistan. We've been there long enough. We have left behind all that we can leave behind. It's time to go. But the pressure on Al-Qaeda that the drones provided is coming off. And if we look at the history of Al-Qaeda, the one thing that we can say with a fair degree of certitude is when the pressure comes off, it regenerates very, very quickly. Look at Iraq, classic case. The Iraqi version of Al-Qaeda regenerated so fast, it turns your head. Whether that will happen in Pakistan or not remains to be seen. But I think there's a serious risk that it will. In other words, the patron-victim situation is going to become even more complicated if we now have a revitalized, rejuvenated Al-Qaeda operating in Pakistan once again, as it was back before 2006. Where do we go with all of this? What's next? Well, it's interesting to me, in a city, Washington, which loves to debate foreign policy all the time, which has hearings on everything, including on talking points for a crisis that was not really a crisis, Pakistan isn't in the media. It's not part of the conversation. There is no real debate about what to do with Pakistan. The Congress of the United States, which has a reputation recently for cutting the budget of everything, has shocked me year in and year out by just saying $1 billion for Pakistan? Okay. The Tea Party votes for it. There's no debate about it. This issue hasn't really matured into a debate within the United States about the future of Pakistan. So I think we're probably on flight control. We'll just keep going along, providing more assistance to Pakistan, even as we have less and less faith in the Pakistanis. And that's where I want to end. Question of faith and trust. I've said the relationship between the governments is pretty terrible. The relationship between Americans and Pakistanis is equally terrible. If you ask Americans, identify the 3 most evil regimes in the world that threaten America, 2 are obvious, right? Iran, North Korea. Polling shows Americans increasingly now add as number 3, Pakistan. Watch American TV shows and movies. Just watch an American TV show where they talk about the terrorist. What do they always say? Trained in Pakistan. As someone who watches American-Pakistani relations, every time I see this in a movie or a television show, it kind of screams out to me. So maybe it doesn't scream out to everybody else, but it's there. Look at the Pakistani side of the equation. Polling in Pakistan, going back well into the 1990s, shows that American popularity is in the single digits. 2000 and so, it was around 8%. Last year, it was around 3%, meaning we're in the statistical realm of error. There could actually be no Pakistani who thinks America is a good country, because 3.5 is the statistical error in a polling system. Ask the question, what is the existential threat to our country? The overwhelming majority of Pakistanis say the United States of America. And when you outpoll India as the bad guy in Pakistan, you have reached the bottom of a hole that is awfully, awfully deep. So not only do we have a dysfunctional relationship as governments, we have an increasingly dysfunctional relationship as people. That doesn't mean Pakistanis don't want to come here, they don't want to send their kids to school, of course they do. But there is deep, enduring, mutual distrust at the heart of this relationship. And whatever policy we decide to pursue in the future is unlikely to change that anytime in the foreseeable future. With that, I'd be happy to take your questions first, and then others.
Are we on? A yes or no will suffice. Great. Well, God, I've missed that. I don't know how I get up in the morning without hearing you, Bruce. Really, no, nothing worries me at all now. So many places we could start. I think I know the answer to the question because you sort of hinted this, but the question really is: so what might anyone do differently? And I would add, as a preface to that while I don't disagree with 95% of what you said, the one thing that the Pakistanis have done in the last 13 years is they have actually been pretty effective against Al-Qaeda itself. And I think if you asked anyone from your former agency or from the military or even the State Department, they would say they're not very good at dealing with the things that threaten them directly. Pakistani Taliban, they're not good with Lashkar-e-Taiba, lots of other terrorist groups, but they've done a pretty good job at cleaning up Al-Qaeda. And that was one reason why no policymaker ever wanted to cut the cord. And the other is, of course, all those nuclear weapons. So, we're back to President Johnson's famous metaphor of having someone inside the tent or having someone outside the tent. I won't go into the full vulgarity of that metaphor, but, should we be doing something different?
Yes, I think there are things that we should do differently. But I think you hit the essential nail right on. Pakistan is too important to ignore for all the reasons I suggested. We have tried alternative options. We have sanctioned Pakistan for almost everything that you can think of. Support for terrorism, its nuclear weapons program, military dictatorships, exporting nuclear technology. That route is, as the political scientists in the room will appreciate, been tested, and we have the results: total, complete, abject failure. It doesn't work. We could consider the use of force, right? We could invade another Muslim country. We've invaded 2 in the last, arguably 3 if you throw in Libya. Nobody in their right mind would use force against Pakistan. First of all, there's the nuclear weapons you described. Secondly, Pakistan is twice the size of California, with 190 million people. When we have successfully defeated the Pakistani army and done whatever it is we're going to do to their nuclear weapons force, what are we going to do with what we have now conquered? Nobody wants to go there. That's ludicrous. So I think you can eliminate a certain number of options right from the beginning. Should we continue to provide billions of dollars in military aid? I would argue not. I wouldn't say that there aren't exceptions, but I don't think the military aid is buying us what we want it to. Military aid is, in large measure, a bribe to get the Pakistani army to do things we want it to do. It's not doing them. It's not doing them. Throwing good money after bad, after a while, becomes a really foolish thing to do. So I think we need to take a very hard look at our military aid relationship with Pakistan. I think the economic assistance projects continue to make a lot of sense. I think there is a lot we can do there. You alluded to this being a depressing briefing. I actually tried to start with the upbeat news about the civilian government, that Pakistan actually has turned a corner. And I really do believe that's true. Pakistan has potentially turned a very, very important corner. And we should recognize that. And therefore, engagement with that civilian government is a smart thing to do. And that includes economic assistance. And that includes probably being a player behind the scenes in encouraging India and Pakistan not to go to the brink again. But that's the big thing I would change, is get us out of the military assistance project relationship.
Well, I'm in the uncomfortable situation of having less faith in the civilian government than you do, but let's just have this one little victory and move on. Another key question out there is the big project for the United States in international affairs this year is withdrawing from Afghanistan.
Right.
And you and I were chatting earlier, and I think we're both reasonably optimistic about the durability of the Afghan National Army and the desire of the Afghan people to turn a page. Certainly in the cities, they're quite optimistic. They like the new regime. I've heard that Afghan life expectancy has grown 20 years in the last decade. That has never happened anywhere on Earth. I think actually the U.S. And its allies have a lot to be proud of in Afghanistan, even if I think most polls would show that we never should have done it this way. But what is the Pakistani game plan, so far as you know it, for this drawdown? And I assume that we're going to have a residual military presence to deal with counterterrorism and with training missions once President Karzai has resigned, or has left office. But do you anticipate that Pakistan will continue to want to make Afghanistan its strategic depth and will continue to try to undermine what's been achieved?
In short, yes. I think that the people who run Pakistan's Afghan policy, and it's not Nawaz Sharif, it's the Chief of Army Staff, General Raheel Sharif. There's no relationship between the two of them. They just both decided that it would confuse everyone if everyone's last name was Sharif in Pakistan. It's been very successful. He and the head of ISI, General Islam, run that portfolio. I think you saw a preview of what they're going to do in the run-up to the election. There was a series of very successful, effective, and high-profile attacks by the Afghan Taliban on all the institutions that intended to be outside monitors, NDI, all of them, were deliberately attacked, and other foreigners with the intent, and they succeeded in this, of driving away the outside monitors. The assumption, I think, behind this strategy was to delegitimize the election. That's a pretty sophisticated strategy, actually. I don't think Mullah Omar thought that one up. I think there's very good reason to believe that was thought up by the ISI. Their intention is exactly as you alluded to finish the job. Pakistan has been trying to create a puppet state in Afghanistan since the 1970s. They've been thwarted. I think they will be thwarted again, because the more important lesson of the elections was not that the international community will cut and run at the first sign of a bomb. It is that the Afghan people were not intimidated. They voted in unbelievable numbers. Even if you account for fraud, the turnout in this election was amazing. And I'm very confident that Abdullah will win a runoff, and that, as you said, he will sign a bilateral security agreement. And I think the odds are better than even, not a whole lot better than even, but better than even, that the Afghan army and the Afghan state will successfully hold off the Pakistanis in 2015 and the Afghan Taliban. And that maybe by 2016 there'll be some serious interest in a political process. We'll see. I do want to add one other point to what you mentioned about our legacy in Afghanistan. In 2001, when the Afghan Taliban ran the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, 100,000 Afghan children were going to school. 100% of them were boys. Today, 9 million Afghan children are going to school, and 4 million of them are girls. That's something to be proud of. It isn't perfect, but something to be proud of. And it wouldn't have happened without the United States intervention in Afghanistan in 2001.
Excuse me. Do you see any outside actors who are going to be likely to try to steer Pakistan in a positive way? There's been some discussion that China is finally getting involved. And I will tell you, I spent 4 years talking to the Chinese about trying to wield their influence over the Pakistanis. And I hear ringing in my ears still the same response. We think of Pakistan as a sovereign nation and an excellent friend that is more than capable of taking care of its domestic issues. But now one hears from US officials that the Chinese are indeed getting a bit nervous about the continuing decay in violence and militancy. Do you have a view on whether there's any hope there?
I think there is hope there. There should be. China should look at this and say, one of our most important allies in the world, which we have done an awful lot for, the Pakistani nuclear program, for example, is suffering severe unrest. The port city of the country is largely out of the country's control. They should. They have a big investment there. Will they? You have more experience dealing with the Chinese than I do. I'm from Missouri on this. Show me.
Well, one last question before we open it up to the audience. And this is asking you a bit to be a little bit of a social scientist, not just a political analyst. Why has Pakistan remained so profoundly dysfunctional? When I think about it, I have to say that I have a hard time thinking of a country that has less social cohesion, less social glue. And if you look, at India, which admittedly has benefited from having a democratic system, it's done an extraordinary job of taking tens of millions of people out of poverty. Admittedly, it has a completely sclerotic bureaucracy, but it has thriving high tech. I mean, it's a world leader in that area. And yet, Pakistan has lagged farther and farther behind India with every passing year. And the statistics that you quoted about demography are actually an indication of how poor it's doing, because birth rates flatten out when you're doing well. So what went wrong?
It's, I'd say the $64 million question of South Asia specialists. I'll add to the doom and gloom part, and then give you the why you should be upbeat. Don't compare it to India. Compare it to Bangladesh. After all, East and West Pakistan were once a country. When East Pakistan became Bangladesh in 1971, by every statistical indicator, level of literacy, life expectancy, successful births, you name it, Pakistan, what we now call Pakistan, West Pakistan then, was the country on the rise. And East Pakistan, Bangladesh, as Henry Kissinger famously said, is a basket case. Well, today, all of those statistical indicators are the other way. Literacy, Bangladesh does better. Life expectancy, Bangladesh does better. Now, Bangladesh is not a basket case, but it's not a country endowed with lots of natural resources. Its principal export is jute. That's not something that most people say, yeah, I really want to get into the jute business tomorrow. But it has done better. It has not developed nuclear weapons. It does not support terrorist groups. Its democracy is far from ideal, but it is a democratic state with elections. Now, admittedly, only 2 women run in the election every time. It's not a thriving example of how democracy should work, but comparison to Pakistan, it's done well. I think there's a number of reasons. One is inherent in the idea. The idea of Pakistan was a very artificial idea created in the 1930s. It was not supposed to exist in the borders that it now has. Those borders were imposed by the British. They created this dysfunctionality of a state with 2 parts 1,000 miles apart from each other. They also helped create the Kashmir issue that has poisoned the relationship. the idea always had a flaw in it. Pakistan was supposed to be the nation for Muslims of South Asia. But from the beginning, almost as many Muslims lived outside of Pakistan than lived inside. And in 1971, when Bangladesh was created, you now had 2 Muslim states in South Asia. And the ideology no longer made sense. I think that's a problem. I think a second problem is the military dictatorships. I think that this pattern of military dictatorships has led to a Pakistan with a huge nuclear weapons arsenal and an educational system that is not underfunded, is not funded at all. It's led to a tax system in which 2% of Pakistanis pay taxes. If you want to see the ideal Tea Party state, Pakistan is the ideal Tea Party state. Nobody pays taxes. The only functioning part of the government is the military. Nothing else works. The educational system has collapsed. There are other reasons as well. Losing wars. Countries that lose wars tend to become obsessed with fighting the next war rather than moving on. India has won its wars for the most part, except for 1962. Its military is quite comfortable being in the barracks. It doesn't want to run the country. It realizes that that's a humongous job. Let someone else do it and be responsible for it. Pakistani military has a very different view of all of this. The upbeat point that I want to come back to, I want to stress it again. You're right. You're right to be skeptical and cynical about Nawaz Sharif. I know Nawaz Sharif very, very well. I bear some responsibility for the fact that his head and his shoulder is still connected to each other. I helped engineer his exile to Saudi Arabia. He is not Thomas Jefferson. He may be Aaron Burr. That's a better example. But he is the democratically elected Prime Minister of Pakistan. He has experience in the job. He's held it twice before. He does say a lot of the right things. More importantly than that, there is among younger Pakistanis an increasing realization their country is on the wrong path. And my best example for that is Malala. Malala is not an aberration in Pakistan. She is, in fact, representative of a new generation of Pakistanis who are sick and tired of the deep state, who are sick and tired of being intimidated by men running around with guns, and who want something better. Now, the tragedy, of course, is Malala's not in Pakistan today. But I believe she speaks for an awful lot of Pakistanis, and I know an awful lot of Pakistanis. Last thing I would say on this. Having written a couple of books about Pakistan, I get an awful lot of emails from Pakistanis. An awful lot of them are unsolicited. Not all of them are that pleasant to read. Most of them are. Most of them are, yes, we want a different Pakistan. We want a new Pakistan. Expose the ISI. Tell the truth about the ISI. And I get, it's a small sample, but I think it's a significant sample.
Actually, I have to say on my trips to Pakistan, whenever you meet sort of the Pakistani intelligentsia over dinner, it's a lot like being in Eastern Europe before the fall of the wall with all of this passion for the U.S. and in the West to help, expose the problems, help them clean things up. It is quite, that part I fully agree is encouraging. I'm going to renege on my promise and ask one more question. Carlotta Gall's new book, she makes the argument that part of the reason that Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, was so estranged from the U.S. government was because he felt that we didn't recognize that Pakistan was the true enemy and the true cause of all those problems in Afghanistan. Now, having watched Hamid Karzai for quite some time, I'm not 100% persuaded, although I can imagine that was an element, but I'd be curious about your thoughts since you've watched Afghanistan very, very closely.
Oh, first thing, I will give a shout out for the book. I think it's a very, very good book. I think, unfortunately, as I mentioned to you, the one chapter about Osama bin Laden has gotten all the attention. And it's an interesting chapter, and it's not exactly a new argument. that it's hard to believe that Osama bin Laden was hiding 1,000 meters from the front door of the Kakul Military Academy and nobody seemed to know about it. But the bulk of the book, 90%, is about the Pakistani relationship with the Afghan Taliban. And I think she nails that exactly, and she makes that case for that relationship better than anyone else has made it. That's part of Karzai's problem, yes. Karzai has been telling the Americans since about 2004, the real enemy is the Pakistani army. And the intelligence backs him up. But for a variety of reasons, and I think we've covered many of them, the United States has preferred to not see that part of Pakistan. Because what are we going to do about it? Again, are we going to invade Pakistan because they support the Afghan Taliban? No. We're trying to persuade them. Well, that hasn't worked either. We've tried to bribe them. That doesn't seem to be working either. We haven't figured out an answer. So the best answer when you don't have an answer is keep your mouth shut. Okay? So we don't talk about the relationship in government terms. Outside government people talk about it. In the government, as you well know, it's not exactly a secret what's going on. But that's not the only part of Karzai's beef with us. Karzai also feels, as he said to me once about President Bush Jr., he said it about Bush in particular, but I think he meant it about all Americans. He said, "You're all hat and no cattle." I said, "Mr. President, what do you mean by that?" It's a rather unusual Afghan term. He said, "Yes, you're all talk. You talk about supporting Afghanistan. You talk about our enduring relationship. You talk about rebuilding our society. How much money do you actually provide? How much have you actually invested in this country? How many troops up until the Obama administration have you put in the country? First 5 years of our involvement in Afghanistan, we had less than 10,000 troops in the country. Afghanistan is a country the size of Texas. If you flatten Afghanistan out, it's the size of the continental US east of the Mississippi River. 10,000 troops is not going to solve the stability problem. It's a bandage. It's a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. And he kept hearing from us that we were serious, and after a while he came to the conclusion, yeah, Americans, good talkers, but they're all hat. There's no cattle there. And I think the legacy of that and the Pakistan issue and the vice president elect in 2008 walking out of a dinner in Kabul with the president of Pakistan, those kind of things, after a while. Last thing I would say, Hamid Karzai is not the most stable human being in the world.
I was glad you brought that up.
We're not exactly dealing with, a full deck here, so we are where we are.
Okay. There is a microphone, I believe. And, why don't we start right up front? Work our way back.
Thank you. It's really exciting to hear you talking about this. Just a brief bit. I lived in Quetta about 20 years ago, and I finished a master's here on Pakistan ethnic repression. And I was just in Pakistan last month for a couple weeks as part of the State Department funded teacher training project. But when I look at this, we have the historical context in the 20th century where Afghanistan was the buffer state between the United States and the Soviet Union. And that ended, hopefully will continue to be ended. But one thing that struck me, you talked about funding to Pakistan on autopilot. Congress just, continuing to write blank checks, I guess. And when I was out there talking with the meeting embassy staff, I was somewhat struck by the lack of knowledge about Pakistan among the staff. And I don't know if that's intentional on the U.S. government's part or not. Maybe the CIA would rather be in control in the background. I don't know, but there's short term. It's a dangerous country. They're in and out constantly, and the in-depth knowledge among the embassy staff was frightening. So the CIA, I just have a couple things, I won't be long. The CIA, I think in the 90s, had this map with redrawn borders in Pakistan. I'm interested in the ethnic issues. And it's something that has been not really talked about as anything serious. But now that we're kind of in a new phase with Pakistan and what you said about the lack of trust, I mean, the relationship with India and Afghanistan is India was the Soviet sphere while Pakistan was the US sphere. And now in Afghanistan, India has been creeping into there with consulates in Afghanistan. So, and Balochistan is a huge province of Pakistan in the west. So a big fear is that India is surrounding Pakistan. But is this something that is thought at all about in intelligence circles? A new dynamic, a new way of, U.S. interests in the area.
Right.
I guess. And I think, I have other questions, but I think my last question is, Mullah Omar, he was the one that was in Kandahar, I believe, and surrounded by U.S. troops when Karzai became president. Is that right?
No.
Oh, okay, there was.
Okay, so why don't we deal with those first few questions?
You've raised a very important issue, which is the whole question of the dissatisfied ethnic communities. You asked earlier, what's wrong with it? One of the reasons Pakistan has been what it is that one part of West Pakistan, the Punjab, has dominated the country for its entire history. And that's particularly true if you look at the military. Pakistani officer corps is overwhelmingly Punjabi, far more than the demographics alone. And the ISI is almost entirely dominated by either Punjabis or Pashtuns. Baluchistan, a huge part of the country, has been in a state of insurrection for so long, most people don't even know there's a war going on there, and has been for a long time. A very ugly war, run by the ISI. The very name Pakistan is an artificial name. It was created by a group of students in Cambridge University in the 1930s, and it stands for Punjab, Afghania, Kashmir, and Istan. Well, Istan is just a throwaway. If you look at that, it tells you a lot about the dysfunctional nature of this. Afghanistan is not part of Pakistan. Kashmir is not part of Pakistan. Baluchistan, which doesn't even get initial. It gets a stan, and probably not that stan. Bengal, where the majority of Muslims lived when the country was created, didn't get into it either. It's symbolic of another deep-rooted problem in Pakistan, which is the Punjabi majority treats the rest of the country like a colony. And large parts of the country, the northwest tribal areas, the federally administered tribal areas, places Americans have come to know more than they ever wanted to know, like Waziristan, are regarded by the Punjabi elite as barbaric areas, uncivilized. One of the reasons that they are mad about drones, of course, is it's an infringement of Pakistani sovereignty. One of the reasons they're not really all that mad about it is they're not really in Pakistan. They don't fly in what the Punjabi elite thinks of as their country. So they blow up things in Waziristan. Who cares? You know, it's a good point for anti-American rhetoric, but we're not going to get really worked up about it. Now, here again, many younger generation of Pakistanis are much more alarmed at what they see going on in Baluchistan than their parents were. And they worry about the nature and unity of the country. And as I alluded to in my talk, I believe that later this week, when Mr. Modi becomes prime minister, a lot of people in Pakistan are going to start saying, well, you know, the Indians, they carved our country up once, they'll do it again. Now, the Americans, we're not very good at complicated conspiracies like that. That would require far more understanding of the dynamics of Pakistani society than you alluded to. I don't think we could pull it off, even if we tried. We want out. We want out. We don't want to get involved in the internecine politics of. There is a group in Washington, I get emails from them too, that wants to sponsor an independent Baluchistan. And they want to convince the US government to support it. I just don't think they're going to get any traction.
Right here.
Could you talk a little more about what we might expect the impact of the new Indian government and the election to be on Pakistan?
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to begin. I think you will remember this. In 1968, Richard Nixon was elected president of the United States. And the Washington Post, which had run scathing op-eds accompanied by scathing, what do you call them, comics, cartoons of Nixon, always showing him with a 5 o'clock shadow, announced the day after election that every president deserved a shave, and they stopped running the cartoons with 5 o'clock shadow. Not for very long, and he didn't deserve a long honeymoon, but they did. I think the same thing we ought to think of Mr. Modi in the same way. There's a lot of baggage about Mr. Modi out there in the media. Undoubtedly, a lot of it has merit. But let's judge him by what he does when he comes to office, not our preset conclusions about him. In other words, let's see what he does, not come to the conclusion that this is a Muslim-hating Hindu nationalist who is bound to cause the Third World War. We have worked with BJP governments before, very successfully. By that I mean both Republicans and Democrats. I suspect that Mr. Modi will be much more interested in getting the economy back up to double-digit growth than he is in any foreign policy issue. And that alone will mean a certain stability and continuity in Indian foreign policy. But I think the real big question is what happens when, not if, but I believe when, there is another significant terrorist operation like Mumbai, like the attack on the Indian parliament in 2000, or something like the Kargil incursion. Will this Indian government respond with the same kind of cautious restraint that we saw Prime Minister Vajpayee and Prime Minister Singh exercise in the face of those outrages in the past? And there, I doubt it. I doubt it. I doubt it not only because I think Mr. Modi is a different character, but I doubt it because my reading of the Indian body politic is that their tolerance level is now 0. They've had it. Now, they don't have a good answer to the problem of the escalation cycle, and they understand the escalation cycle well, but their tolerance for attacks like Mumbai is gone. And I would anticipate a very much more muscular and reactive approach. And that, if that doesn't keep you up tonight, I don't know what keeps people from sleeping well.
Right here.
Just going off of that, but kind of reapplying it to the U.S. specific situation. In your speech, you referred to the fact that it's been historically proven that the U.S.'s strategic relationship with Pakistan is such that it can turn on a dime, while also focusing on the fact that there's an entrenched nature of the distrust, both on a state-to-state level and on a civilian-to-civilian level. So, in light of the recent kind of very public CIA run-in in Yemen, with Al-Qaeda kind of renewing interest in the Raymond Davis incident, what's your assessment of the degree to which an individual incident like that could realign the broader strategic framework shaping both the U.S. and Pakistan's kind of interpretation of the relationship?
Raymond Davis, for those of you who don't know, was a CIA contract officer assigned to Pakistan who, his version, I'll start with his version, was pursued by 2 individuals whom he believed to be terrorists intending to kill him, and he shot both of them dead. For reasons that are very unclear, the embassy/station sent a vehicle to come to his rescue and ran over a 3rd Pakistani en route getting there, and in any case got there too late to save him. He was indicted for murder. We claimed diplomatic immunity. The Pakistanis said they had no such record of diplomatic immunity. And it was a huge contretemps in our relationship. Lesson number 1, the CIA needs to do a much better job of scrutinizing the people that they hire for doing security jobs in places like Pakistan. Cowboys may have the swagger, but they're really the wrong people to send. And we found that out when Raymond Davis came home, and a week later he beat up a 65-year-old man over a parking space in Colorado Springs. How this guy got through the security process and the psychological tests that I had to take, I don't know, but don't do it again. Could something like that happen? Sure, absolutely, and have huge implications. Last week, you probably didn't notice this, but in Karachi, an FBI officer was arrested at the airport because his luggage included 6 bullets. Now, he said after the fact that he'd forgotten that he'd left the bullets, at least he didn't have a gun, but he'd left the bullets in his luggage. Come on, man. I went to spy school. Those things were kind of simple. You don't leave bullets in your luggage, right? You're supposed to get the super new Wizzo gun that they can't find anyway, like James Bond has. Yeah, it could. We have not sent the best and brightest to Pakistan for a variety of reasons. We have expected a clandestine service that is not James Bond and never aspired to be James Bond, to do things that it's not really well prepared to do. I think we realize that, and we're trying to get out of that business. I think John Brennan, whatever else you think of him, wants to bring the CIA home to being a traditional spy organization that collects intelligence and analyzes it.
Okay. How about right here? You're looking away, but I'm calling on you.
Hi. You spoke about turning off the military spigot, but focusing on the civilian sphere. What do you think the U.S. or other Western countries can do in that regard, and what impact can they have on a 3% approval rating?
Well, you're absolutely right. Don't, whatever don't expect that we're going to go from 3 to 6 overnight. We'll be lucky if we get to 4, okay? You don't change deeply held views overnight. But there are things that we can and have been doing. In 2008, then Senators Kerry and Lugar and Obama sponsored legislation to increase economic assistance to Pakistan. That legislation has been passed, and it has resulted in significantly increased. And we don't have anything as dramatic as a 20-year increase in life expectancy in Pakistan. But USAID can point to some significant areas of progress. One thing that we can do, and we are engaged in, is energy production in Pakistan. This is a country which most Pakistanis live in a perpetual state of a brownout every day. I mean, they know it's going to come. That's part of your planning. You plan that for 6 or 7 hours of the day, you'll have no electricity. Even in the best suburbs of Islamabad and Karachi, you will have 6 or 7 hours. Now, in August, I can tell you, in Islamabad, if the power goes out at 11 o'clock in the morning, that is a really unpleasant day that you're about to serve. Pakistani Foreign Ministry a year ago actually said that its employees don't have to wear socks to the office in the summer because of the anticipated power outages. It's a rather unique way of thinking about solving your energy problem. I'm not making that up. It's true. It really is true. That's one of the glories of working on Pakistan. There are stories that you wouldn't think were possible but are actually true. We can do there. We're in the process of helping build, we don't have enough money to build it, a huge hydroelectric dam in Pakistan that will make a significant difference in terms of energy production for the country, and it's a renewable, as long as climate change stays within certain parameters, it is a theoretically renewable source of energy. There are other things we can do, but it's hard. This is really, really, really hard work, and the distrust is enormous. I'll give you just one example. AID, I think 3 years ago, purchased 1,000 incubators for Pakistani hospitals for premature babies. 1,000. Free gift from the United States of America. The government of Pakistan, after a drone attack that was regarded as particularly egregious, turned us down. Said, no, we don't want them. We won't take your incubators. That's a hard one.
I will supplement that by saying on the hard power side of things, we actually once had a shipment of 1 million rounds of ammunition going to our anti-terrorism assistance training in Pakistan, and the plane was turned away from the airport as it was entering Pakistan twice, and we couldn't deliver ammunition. So it is in fact the case that the animus gets so great that they don't even want our bullets.
Right.
So, yeah.
Question about how monotheistic first the ISI is, and secondly, how monotheistic the relationship in the eyes of the ISI is the relationship between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. They want to put Taliban back in Afghanistan. Do they want to put Al-Qaeda back as an independent agent in Afghanistan or anywhere?
Let me start with the first question. No, the Pakistani army, like any organization, is not monotheistic.
Monolithic.
Monolithic, right.
They're very monotheistic.
Right.
I can tell from personal experience.
Right. Yes, absolutely right. Not monolithic. There are differences of view, and we don't have a very good window into that. But it stands to reason that the arguments that are circulating in Pakistani society as a whole must to some extent be replicated within the Pakistani officer corps. Maybe not yet at the same intensity, but there must be there. There must also be officers in the Pakistani army who are looking at this and saying, you know, this strategy of patronizing terrorism isn't really working very well, you know. We haven't broken up India. They don't look like they're on their last legs. We haven't taken over Afghanistan. And we have a huge problem at home. That said, the officers who are running it today seem to be still in the old mindset of the deep state and obsessed with India, as I said, and determined to win the war in Afghanistan. And by that they mean putting a puppet in control of as much of Pakistan as they can. By the way, they also have no real love for the Afghan Taliban. This is not a, you know, you think our relationship with Karzai is dysfunctional. The ISI's relationship with Mullah Omar is even more dysfunctional. But the balance of power is overwhelmingly on one side. You know, if Mullah Omar wants to see his mother tomorrow, the ISI says, well, you want to see your mother? You know what you need to do. You know, you want to see your niece, your nephew? You want to be alive tomorrow? You know, it's not a relationship. It's not the way we run a liaison relationship. Okay, it's a very different structure. They want the Afghan Taliban. They're not looking for Al Qaeda. They have whatever the nature of the Pakistani relationship with Al Qaeda, whatever the relationship between the ISI and that hideout in Abbottabad, the last thing Pakistan wants, the military wants to have, is an Al Qaeda that draws America back to Pakistan. Whether they can prevent it from happening, as I said earlier, I have my serious doubts about. But they don't want it. The Pakistani army is going to be standing there on the tarmac as we fly out saying, goodbye, hope we never see you again. Aside from the ammunition you might send us in the future, but you know, go and be gone. They don't want us to come back. They've come to the conclusion we're responsible for all their problems.
Just an extension. Do you think that the Afghani Taliban would welcome back Al Qaeda, or have they said, well, this experiment didn't work very well, and let's try and build a country we want if they get into power? I'm from Missouri on that one too. What did the Afghan Taliban say the day after Osama bin Laden was killed? They mourned the loss of a great martyr hero. It wasn't exactly, you know, they didn't have to say anything, right? If you don't know what to say, particularly the Afghan Taliban, which is not known as one of the public relations factories of the world. Mullah Omar gives one statement a year, and he chose to issue a statement the day after Osama bin Laden was dead. So I'd like to believe that the argument you make resonates in the Afghan Taliban, but I don't want to test it. Okay? Let's not test that argument. Any more than I want to test the argument that they've suddenly come to the conclusion that girls should go to school, which they say too. They've had an awakening that girls should go to school. I doubt there are very many Afghan girls who believe that. I doubt it.
We have 5 more minutes, so what I would like to do is just gather who still has questions. We have one here and one here. So why don't you both state your questions, and then Bruce can answer, and that will probably take us to the end.
In our state building efforts in Afghanistan, one of the goals of the coalition was to address the rampant amount of corruption in Afghanistan. And so my question is regarding Pakistan. How rampant is corruption in Pakistan right now, and how does that hinder the Pakistani people from trusting their own government? Because you mentioned the levels of distrust with the Pakistani people with the U.S. government and the U.S. people, but I'm curious also about how they consider their own government.
To what degree do polls show support or lack of support on the part of the public in Pakistan for the army? And to what degree are they aware of the operations of the ISI?
Corruption. The government that I praised for successfully filling its first term in office, its full term in office, was led, of course, by Mrs. Bhutto's husband, President Asif Ali Zardari, better known in Pakistan by his nickname, Mr. 10%, on the argument that he never let a contract go through the government in which he didn't get a 10% kickback. It's a lie. He got 15 or 20% on every kickback. President Zardari is among the most corrupt people in the world. I've talked to NGOs who went to Pakistan and were shaken down by Zardari for a T-shirt. I mean, come on, you know, a T-shirt? You're the president of Pakistan. He couldn't help himself, was the argument that his supporters make. President Sharif is not known, Prime Minister Sharif is not known for the same level of personal corruption, but he is the most wealthy industrialist in the country, and the only major highway in the country links his hometown to Islamabad. I don't think that's an accident of highway construction. Yes, they have a huge corruption problem, but I'll go from that into what do polls show. Polls show that more and more Pakistanis are unhappy with this situation and want the country to move in a different direction. It takes a very brave Pakistani to write an op-ed that says the Taliban, that the ISI is out of control. That's a very brave thing to do. People do it. People do it regularly. People regularly call for the army to be brought under control. That's a dangerous thing to do. It's not like writing an op-ed for the Boston Globe, you know, that says, I don't know what your last op-ed said. You're not going to be visited by the CIA and left dead in a ditch. It happens in Pakistan, but people do it. There is a growing anger, frustration in Pakistan that this system is not working. What it lacks is a political outlet. A political outlet has not really developed. One way to think about Pakistani politics, and I'll end on this, is very simple. Since 1988, every Pakistani election has featured two candidates, Nawaz Sharif and Benazir Bhutto. That's still the case today. Benazir Bhutto has been dead for 7 years, but she's still the alternative candidate on the ballot. You know, we think it's, and I personally think it's not a very good sign of American democracy that 2016 could feature a Clinton versus a Bush, but imagine if it was the same two over and over again in every election since 1988. The political process has not yet produced a real challenge to the whole system, but it's percolating there, and you can see it. The infatuation with Imran Khan, who isn't the solution, believe me, he's not the solution, but he represents anger at, you know, I want to have somebody else on the ballot, you know? I want to have something else as an opportunity. I think that's all there. It's percolating. The history of Pakistan tells us to expect the unexpected. And who knows how that will turn out over the course of the next few years as Pakistani frustration with the failure of their political system becomes more and more acute.
Well, that's a good and telling place to end, and I want to thank you, Bruce, for a fabulous presentation. I know we'll all go dancing home now, but it was incredibly illuminating, and thank you very much for joining us.